Hello, friends, and welcome to the May 12th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with the Texas Legislature. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and this week we're recording with just over 2 weeks remaining in the legislative session, the morning after the House deadline for House bills to pass through their originating chamber. And I know many advocates celebrate the bad bills that are killed at this deadline, but this morning, I'm reflecting on the vast number of common sense, good bills that failed to even make it to the House floor for a vote. Last week on the program, we talked about some common sense gun reforms that would help protect our communities. Even the bills that ended up passing committee didn't get a chance to advance to the House floor. Today, we'll welcome Dr. Charlie Brown, board member with the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, to talk about other key reforms Texas's ban on abortions that are necessary to better define steps that can legally be taken to protect the lives of Texas moms. Doctors need a better legal definition, and the legislature was unwilling to even have the conversation. Bills that would have clarified the issue were filed early, and none of them even received a committee hearing. Y'all, Texans of faith have done incredible work this legislative session. We can celebrate our engagement, which has been, without exception, diligent, disciplined, respectful, and loving. Our work this session leaves us well positioned to do the significant work that will be needed in the interim, talking with our elected representatives and candidates for office to encourage them to prioritize common sense reforms that our communities are demanding, and making sure all our friends and neighbors are resourced and mobilized for informed civic engagement. It seems like there's been a lot of time this session focused on nonsense that doesn't impact the lives of families in our communities and congregations. It's going to take all of us working together to help our lawmakers do better. So with that, I hope listeners will buckle up for the last 2 weeks of session, celebrate the work you've done together, and start preparing for conversations we'll need to have post-session. And I hope you enjoy the conversation today with Dr. Charlie Brown and use it to help shape your advocacy work in the weeks to come. Joining us for today's conversation is Dr. Charlie Brown with the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. He's a board member representing District 11, which covers the state of Texas. And it's an important conversation for us today because he practices in the subspecialty area related to maternal and fetal medicine with high-risk pregnancies. And so certainly something that the Texas Legislature can and should be talking about right now. But we'll jump in and have a conversation with him about that. Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So this is a topic that we haven't talked a ton about on this program in the past, but is certainly important in light of everything that's been happening in Texas and throughout the United States over the course of the last year. As our listeners will assumedly all know, the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision ended the national right to abortion established in Roe v. Wade and reverted abortion legislative authority to the states. And Texas was one of those states that had a trigger ban in place. So do you feel like the Texas Legislature, or Texas doctors for that matter, were prepared for this decision? And what happened in Texas post-Dobbs?
Well, whether they were prepared or not, since I don't really understand, and I don't think anyone really understands what they knew about the possibility of the Dobbs decision when they passed the trigger law. It was designed to just be on the books. So if that did happen, they wouldn't have to come back in a special session and create yet another law. But what happened in Texas after Dobbs was pretty dramatic in that the trigger law, which was on the books, went into effect, as did the recognition of a law that had already been on the books for, I can't remember exactly when, but early 20th century, maybe late 19th century, like many other states had abortion laws that had been on the books and became moot after the Roe v. Wade decision by the Supreme Court. And then once Roe v. Wade was reverted back to the states, those historical state laws went into effect. And most of those laws were actually written before we even had pregnancy tests and those kinds of things. So
right.
They're truly antiquated in our understanding of how to manage pregnancy in the 21st century. But that went into effect. And it also, in addition to those laws, Texas has passed over the last 2 decades multiple laws regulating the practice of abortion when it was legal. And a summary of all the laws about abortions, which can impact this discussion, a summary of those laws with just their definition and explanation is a 20-page single-spaced document. So we have a lot of laws on the books, and that's one of the issues which makes our current situation difficult to navigate.
Right. And one of the things that's led to is a series of news stories over the course of the last several months or year. And every few weeks, we're seeing stories about doctors who are unable to treat patients with dangerous pregnancies, something that I know you know something about. But the authors of the trigger ban insist that their law protects the life of the mother. So I think one of the questions that we have to ask is, were doctors and hospitals prepared for what was coming? And do medical professionals have a clear grasp on what the trigger ban means and understand how to implement it? What's going on, and why should Texans be concerned about this issue not being addressed?
Well, I think the first part of the question was, were they prepared? And my general feeling after having literally dozens or hundreds of conversations with other physicians, lawyers, policymakers, very few people really anticipated that Roe v. Wade would be struck down by the Supreme Court. That said, it was struck down. So since it was somewhat of a surprise, I'm speculating they probably really were not prepared. And at the policy level, but I can assure you that once abortion became illegal, virtually 95%, I'm guessing, of all of abortion procedures were done in abortion clinics, which were immediately shut down because they were illegal when Dobbs went into effect. And that created that the only place that truly indicated abortions could be performed was for critically ill women, which put them in hospitals. And for the last 20 or 30 years, hospitals did some abortions, but they really referred most cases to abortion clinics unless they absolutely needed to be in the hospital for medical reasons for the mother at that point in time. And what this decision has done is it has moved some of the not totally emergency situations back into the hospital, which are ill prepared to deal with it because there was no regulation about performing abortions in the outpatient clinics. Now that they're gone, the hospitals are having to deal with many of these thorny medical and ethical issues surrounding abortion, which is a safe procedure.
Yeah, so it is safe to say that there is just a lot of uncertainty going on for doctors and hospitals as we live into this new era.
Yes.
And one of the things that we've been also don't want to keep hearkening back to the news, but there's certainly been a lot of attention paid to some rare types of dangerous conditions that I think we're referring to as non-viable pregnancies, where there's no chance of a fetus developing into a baby, and specifically talking about things like molar pregnancies. You shared with us an NPR story that we'll make sure that we include with the episode description. Can you explain what molar pregnancies are, how they happen, and why they're so dangerous?
I can. First off, molar pregnancies they've been recognized for centuries, but it wasn't until the 19th century that people really recognized these tumors as being associated with pregnancy per se, because they were just tumors that affected women's health and could be fatal, cause the symptom of uterine bleeding in almost all cases. And they were managed in a variety of ways for centuries. But the connection with it being a abnormal fertilization of the egg or ovum in the woman, creating tissue which will not develop normally into an embryo, fetus, or child, but it just develops the placental tissue, which is called the gestational tissue or the trophoblastic tissue. And those tissues can become tumors and act like other tumors and cancers where they can metastasize to other organs. And that condition, prior to some medical innovations in around the 1960s, specifically with the drug called methotrexate, and now some others, it was virtually 100% fatal. And I think the problem is that with the trigger law specifically is the good news is it's a short law, and the link will be there, but it specifically says in the second line that fertilization means a point in time when a male human sperm penetrates the zona pellucida of a female human ovum. So that's fertilization. That's in point 2 in the law. And then it says in point 5, an unborn child means an individual living member of the Homo sapiens species from fertilization until birth, including the entire embryonic and fetal stages of development. So that is an absolute biologic error embedded in this law, because a molar pregnancy and gestational trophoblastic disease, which is a larger spectrum of types of tumors and disorders, of which a molar pregnancy is one of those disorders, result from an abnormal fertilization of the ovum with the human sperm. But in almost all cases, there'll never be any fetus tissue, no baby, nothing. But this law makes it a potentially life imprisonment for you to treat this and take care of this problem on the part of the mother. And therein lies the problem. There's a flaw in the definition in the law because it was not written by physicians. Or if it was, they were physicians that I guess didn't know about molar pregnancy. But it was not written in a way that takes account for this potentially fatal disorder. And because of this law and the steep penalties for the conditions outlined in the law of when you can actually do some treatment, led to this NPR story you just referenced of a woman who clearly was not going to have a normal baby, but it took weeks for her to get her condition cared for, which she ultimately did, but she had to go to another state. She was from Oklahoma, and she had to go to, I think, Colorado or Illinois or someplace to actually get her care done. But it took 2 or 3 weeks to get that arranged. But today, if you follow the law as it's written, she could not easily be treated in Texas or Oklahoma without a lot of risk to the caregivers and possible imprisonment.
And so that is the reality now, right? The doctors are just going to have to be turning patients away who need medically necessary care.
Well, that is already happening. It's not they will be. Yeah. They have been, and those are the stories that are now coming out in the press, which have been, and they'll keep coming out until some of these issues get resolved.
And so the legislature's meeting now. I mean, we're a couple weeks until the end, and so this is a conversation we could have had months ago, I guess, but or have been having over the course of the last few months. But what are the fixes that are necessary? What do you wish the legislature would have been focusing on and will focus on in the future?
Well, first off, in a press interview that Governor Abbott gave before the election, uh, it was, I think, a Dallas TV station. He acknowledged that there was some problems with the laws that needed, where women were being harmed, and that was not right. Uh, so we were hopeful that when the legislature met, they would address some of these problems. But here we are on the last day where any laws can be pushed forward, and it hasn't been addressed. So that's one thing that all physicians in Texas that care for women were hoping would be done in this legislative session. In terms of ACOG, who I'm representing today, we had several other issues which are important to women's health that we did advocate for, specifically expanding Medicaid to a year postpartum, because abortion is no longer available in Texas. A very effective way of avoiding the impact of pregnancy on women who have these medical conditions, which in which a pregnancy can harm them. We have been advocating for easier and more efficient access to contraception to prevent the pregnancy, so the women do not find themselves in these circumstances where they actually need an abortion. But we haven't had much success thus far in this session in that. And then there was some other issues that are important to obstetricians, specifically medical liability. And one of these other abortion laws, which again got a lot of press when it came out, called SB 8, allows for any citizen, even someone who has nothing to do with the family, the physician, the patient, to sue a physician for damages just because they think that we might be doing something that might be related to abortion, even if they don't even know the patient. And that just doesn't seem right. So the whole liability aspect of a lawsuit was something else that we were hoping would be addressed, and sadly, it is not.
Yeah, it seems like many of these recommendations that you all have are kind of common sense changes that could be made, and it is disappointing that that action hasn't been taken. So, regardless, the legislature is closing out in a couple of weeks, and we still have work to do. What can people of faith who care about women's health do to help moving forward?
Well, I've been a teacher in obstetrics and gynecology and delivering babies in the state of Texas for over 42 years. And one thing that I've noticed, I'm a member of a church here in Austin, and the Bible really has lots of reproductive stories in them. So people of faith are interested in these stories. And I'll just recall a few, which I frequently include in my lectures to medical students and residents and colleagues. The first observation is we all need to recognize that women's reproductive health is a political issue. And if you look in the book of Exodus, Pharaoh commanded the midwives to kill the male Hebrew babies. They did not do it. And so we know the story, those of us who know the story. So this isn't new that people of faith need to get involved with reproductive issues. The other thing, which doesn't directly impact this, but I've always enjoyed, is some of the other stories in Genesis of Jacob and Esau, Zerah and Pharez, the whole twinning thing. That was kind of one of my special areas of interest, and the whole impact of how the birthing process is part of the human condition, and those stories of the management of twin pregnancies. I'm not a theologian. I'm sure some of your listeners will be, but there's lots of interpretation of just how the obstetrician manage or the midwife manage those deliveries, and its impact and significance on God's plan on earth. So, with that said, what can they do? Try and listen for more stories, help the women that are facing these problems if you can. And again, there's laws about what kind of help you can do. I'm not suggesting anybody violate the law, but be sympathetic to the plight, because as these stories project, these women in all these stories, they want to have the children. Things did not go well, just like a woman who has a molar pregnancy, whether she's trying to be pregnant or not, unintended pregnancy. But this is an error of fertilization that is part of biology. And I think it's legitimate to help the mother. And I disagree that a sperm that goes into an egg should trump the mother's health, which is what the trigger law basically says.
Right.
And so, on a larger sense, help convince the legislature that they need to stop practicing medicine and let the physicians, in consultation with the patients and their families, try and decide what is best for their situation, the health of the mother, the health of their potential. And some of these women are not even pregnant yet when they're having some of these problems, but many of them want to have a family, and we are putting their lives at risk and disrupting the family dynamics, and quite frankly, violating the medical ethics of letting the patient decide what they think is best for them and their family. And that has been removed by many of these laws regarding abortion. And I think people of faith can recognize that that is not right.
Well, Doctor, Mother's Day is coming up, and I know many of our listeners are listeners of faith, but all of us came from a mom, I assume. So I would much rather the women in my life be working with you to make decisions about their medical future and not members of the Texas Legislature. So I appreciate all of that, and appreciate you and all of your colleagues for doing this important work day in and day out. There are going to be some folks on this who would want more information. Any places you'd recommend us to go to find that?
Well, for specifically about molar pregnancy, it is somewhat an abstract concept if you've never been exposed to it. So one thing you can do is just go to Google molar pregnancy and hit the choice images, and it will show you what these tumors look like. And for the Texas Legislature to write a law that says that is a unborn child, that language needs to be removed from Texas law. It's just not congruent with biologic reality.
Right.
Now, that's not really addressing abortion. That's just these women have tumors that can be cancers that can kill them. They need to be treated, and the people who want to treat them shouldn't have to worry about being second guessed and potentially be charged with a felony for taking care of these poor women that have these problems. The other thing you can do is bring this up wherever you do worship, bring it up of what to do. I think I know that in the lay reporting of this, different religions, different even Protestant have different interpretations of what all this means. And I think all of God's people recognize there are some differences in interpretation, but I think it's going to be very difficult in the world if everyone just wants to eliminate anyone who doesn't see it exactly their way. Especially in the Protestant Christian church. I mean, there's lots of ways of interpreting this. And I'm Presbyterian, and the church I go to, this is something that is really not in the realm of, this is between a woman and doctor or provider, midwife, whatever. But this really isn't something that our preacher is going to try and insert their nose into. We trust that good Christians make the right decision prayerfully with what is right for them at that moment in time.
Well, I appreciate all of that. It has certainly been helpful. I'll also, since you alluded to it earlier in the conversation, note that ACOG has some really great resources online, especially related to advocacy. That's acog.org. So make sure you check that out for other pieces of information. Dr. Brown, again, really appreciate the time. Any closing thoughts for today?
I'm glad y'all contacted me because I had no idea that this podcast was out there, and now I know about it. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, again, really appreciate the time, and thanks for your work. Thanks for your work on behalf of Texas women, you and your entire group. So thanks again.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Dr. Charlie Brown for the time and for his work with Texas moms. I also feel like I should get some credit for not making any jokes about my favorite cartoon characters during this episode, but we'll save that for another day. I also want to thank you for tuning in today and throughout the legislative session. As I said in the open, Texans of Faith have been champs this legislative session, and after a short post-session break, I hope we'll all shift our attention to the conversations that we all need to be having post-session. Texas Impact is here to support your civic engagement work. If you're interested in reproductive health, we have an action team for you. Go to texasimpact.org to sign up for that team or find other ways that you can get involved. As we wrap up, make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast and are sharing it with your friends and congregations. And consider joining Texas Impact to support this podcast and the work of Texas Impact year-round. If you have any questions, let me know. You can reach me directly at scott@texasimpact.org. So with that, I think it's time to draw this episode to a close. So remember, the world needs Texans of Faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.